Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Building with Breven podcast. This is your host, Steven, and I'm here with my co-host, Mike, my father. Yeah, we've got a great episode for you guys this week. It is episode 34, and we are continuing that series that we've been doing on our most popular episode thus far. That was episode 22. For those of you that have not listened to that one, definitely go back and listen to that. The 7 steps to build your custom home. So we're breaking down those 7 steps and really getting into kind of the details of the building process. So this is the 6th step of the process, and it is the trim phase of your home. So it's going to be a good episode. Dad, how's everything been?
Going well, Steven. Just building houses and having a ball.
Awesome. Yep. That's how we do it. Well, cool. Yeah, let's jump into this episode. I'm sure the listeners are excited to hear about this trim phase. This is the fun one. This is where the house really starts to come together as far as all the selections that you've made for your home. So the interior selections are all coming together. You're starting to see the hard work that you did and all the decisions you had to make are coming together into one seamless piece. So this is a continuation of our last episode and our last phase, which was that drywall phase, where we started with insulation, and then, of course, the drywall goes over top of that. Now that drywall is done, this is where that interior finish out starts to come in. So we call it the trim phase. It includes a lot of different things. It's not just trim carpentry, but it is also electrical trims, HVAC trim, plumbing trim, cabinets, paint, flooring and tile, countertops. Like I said, it includes a lot. And we're also going to touch on the exterior of the home as well to make sure that we're keeping both of those going concurrently. And the exterior is coming along nicely with the interior. So let's break this down a little bit, Dad, and just kind of talk through with the listeners or for the listeners, maybe a little bit more about what each of these steps are in the process, what to look out for, like we've been doing in the previous episodes. And maybe you can preface it with what we were talking about earlier, that these don't necessarily need to go in sequential order like the rest of the build has gone thus far. So yeah, tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, well, the trim phase, I think you hit on all the highlights, is when you kind of put the gingerbread on the house. The sticks and bricks, the drywall's up. So you have the big box, but what trims out the box? It's like putting the icing on the cake. We're going to put up the baseboards, the interior doors, the cabinets, the flooring. And then once all that's in, then you can put the countertops in and then work on your plumbing, electrical, HVAC, things like that. So it really kind of makes the house decorative, if you can use that word. But you're going to see a whole lot of progress in a short period of time at this phase. So the trim phase usually goes fairly quickly, a whole lot quicker than the framing and all the inspections prior to that. And like you were saying, there is not really, there's a couple different ways to do it. So you can put the drywall up and paint, or you can put the drywall up and put the interior trim in and then paint. So there's a couple different ways to kind of get to the end of this also, but you also want to use logic. You don't want to put plumbing in before you put the countertops in, because then you have to have the plumber come back after the countertops are in, things like that. So there is a logical sequence, but there are certain things that can be done simultaneously. And one of those things is actually you can work on the outside while you're working on the inside. We call that a parallel task in the critical path. So that's what you're going to see that's going to be happening at the trim phase.
Awesome. Yep. I think that's a great preface for this episode. And I like how you brought that analogy that this is the icing on the cake. To continue with my analogy for the listeners that have been following along with this series, this could be the clothes and the jewelry on the human body analogy that we've been using. So we have the skin, maybe the drywall and the exterior shell and all that kind of stuff of the home. But to continue on with that, yeah, the clothing and the accessories, the handbags and the jewelry and all that stuff that people wear, this is the jewelry and the accessories of your home is really what's going in during this phase. So yeah, let's jump in, because like you mentioned, Dad, there's several ways to slice this, but let's kind of try to take them through mostly how we like to do it, and also kind of thinking through that most logical path. Like you said, and like I've already said, there's not a critical path, so to speak, on this phase 2 of the build. Can kind of take some creative liberties, or if something's on back order, that kind of thing, you can shuffle your schedule around a little bit, but you don't want to be foolish and put carpet in before you paint, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Exactly.
So yeah, I would say the first thing, you got your drywall up, like you mentioned. It can be a great time to bring the painter through for the first round of painting. Whether you install the trim in the doors first or just paint the walls first, that's kind of a painter preference or builder preference. So, what we want to reiterate here to the listeners is if you see your builder doing it differently than what we're describing right now, it's not a red flag by any means. They probably have their means and methods that they've found to be successful, just like we have, but we're just kind of talking through so that listeners can follow along with this path that we've been painting out thus far. Yeah, let's talk through it. Maybe it's easier to just kind of break it up with trim carpentry. So let's start with trim and doors, and talk through maybe a little bit more about what that includes, what listeners should be looking out for at that phase.
Yeah. So obviously, once the house is drywalled, you need to put baseboards up. You need to put casing up. You need to hang the interior doors. And so the trim carpenter is going to come to the house and measure walls, put baseboard up. If there's a fireplace that needs trimming, they're going to put the wood around the fireplace. So that isn't a logical phase that should be done right after the drywall. You obviously can't paint that if it's going to be like an enamel trim or something. That has to be up before you do your paint. So there's a lot of stuff that happens in that just physical, that wooden trim phase, guardrails, things like that. So that would be the next thing. That also kind of sets the stage for if you're going to put tile in, kind of it gets the cabinets and allows for the future of kind of the other things to go in, cabinets, countertops. But the wooden trim is a big step.
Yep. Yeah, I think that covers most of it. And to add to that, this is also the time where they're mostly going to be doing your closet shelving too, your pantry shelving, things like that. And we actually will do on our true custom homes, we'll come through with the homeowners and the trim carpenter, do a trim walk, and we'll draw out on the walls what the homeowners want to see for their closets. So think most people know about California closets as a custom closet in your home. This is kind of that time to do a California style closet or a very true custom closet with your builder, with the trim carpenter, and make sure you're showing them inspiration photos of what you want to see for your closet, that kind of thing. Because the trim carpenter is the artist with wood, is the way I like to put it. So yeah, showing them what the visual is supposed to look like, and then they can build it to that. But yeah, that's all this trim phase. So
and Steven,
trim,
custom bookcases, things like that you might want to get in at that time. One of the things that customers can check is door swings. This is kind of a silly thing, but make sure when they hang a door that the door is swinging in the right direction and not swinging in the wrong direction. So according to the blueprint, all doors have a certain swing that should be logical when you go into a bedroom, that the door might swing into the wall instead of opening up into the middle of the room or something like that. So just there have been mistakes made like that. So it's a good time to go through and say, is this door swing logical? And is it per the blueprint? That's what the customer can check, and just kind of keep an eye on things that way.
and the other things that trim carpenters will do as well that we don't do, but we need to touch on is sometimes the trim carpenters will also be the cabinet makers. And if the trim carpenters are going to build your cabinets, a lot of times they'll be in the home for a little bit longer to build those cabinets or build them off site in their shop and then bring them and install them if you're going with unfinished cabinets. So this would be a good time to do that with all the raw trim in the house, the raw cabinets before the painter gets in there, so that everything the painter needs to paint is inside the house when they come through. And maybe crown molding is another thing too that we didn't touch on. Any accent walls, trim accent walls, or chair railing. Like you mentioned, some trim carpenters will do the stairs as well. So you want to make sure that the trim carpenter is trimming out the stair stringers and the handrails and the balusters, if those are wood. All that stuff should be going in at this point before the painter goes in there. So I think everybody's kind of hearing the way that this is going. So the next person in the house would most likely be the painter in our situation. Yep. Getting the painter in there to paint the trim that was just installed, as well as the drywall and the ceilings, and really paint everything in the house at this point, because there's no flooring down. It's usually just concrete or whatever your foundation is, drywall, and the trim. So it all needs to be painted, not the floor necessarily, especially if you're doing stained concrete, that kind of thing does not need to be painted, absolutely. But you get what we're saying. The painter is the most logical next person in the home at this point. We call this the wall out paint. It's just the term for it in the business. They come through and the painter will spray the walls typically with a gun or a spray gun, and it really gets a nice coat of paint on the walls. Sometimes they'll do multiple coats. Sometimes they'll do a primer before. It all just depends on your quality and the paint and the selections and everything else. So yeah, the painter will come through and do all that. Sometimes you'll even see the painters what we call back roll. So they'll come through, they'll spray the walls, and some other person's working right behind the sprayer to use a big roller and roll the walls so that it's a little bit more uniform finish. So you may see any combination of that, but just kind of wanted to talk through that. Also, one important thing to note with the painter is you want to make sure that they're caulking all your baseboards and anywhere that needs caulking really well, letting that dry first. If it's not allowed to dry and they paint right over it, that's where you'll start to see some cracking in the future. And then wood putty and wood fill any nail holes on your trim, sand those and make sure those are sanded down, not just puttied and then left, because that'll all show up after it's painted and left to dry. So definitely want to make sure you've got a smooth start. They're sanding everything and then they're painting. But yeah, anything to add to that, Don?
Yeah, I think that what you touched on is excellent. There are different levels of paint too. And when you said that a painter might come back and back roll the walls, they're going to put an extra mil thickness of paint on the walls, and that's just a higher quality paint job. And some custom builders can put we talk about paint in terms of level 1 paint to a level 5 paint. Level 5 being like just mirror, like glass. And of course, with each level of paint that you go to is going to cost you more money. And the painter can spend a month in the house detailing everything that you just said, Stephen, about putting nail holes and caulking and sanding and making all the joints perfect. Production builders typically aren't going to give you a level 5 paint job. Production builders are going to give you maybe a level 2 or level 3. Custom builders should be looking at level 3 or level 4. A level 5 is not as common because it costs a lot of money and the painter has to stand there a lot of time. It does give you a better finish. So that's something to consider if you really want to go to that level. But it does take a whole lot more work to get it to a level 5 paint job. So
Yeah,
just
yeah,
kind of
very
informing
good on
customers
that.
that don't expect a level 5 paint out of a production builder. They're putting on a primer coat and a top coat. That's it. But a level 5 paint could be 5 coats of paint, sanding in between each one. So it's a whole lot of labor to get to a higher level
Yep.
paint job. So
Yeah, that's a really good note. And just like everything else, there's different quality of the materials as well. So there's different qualities of paint from any one of the big paint suppliers like Sherwin-Williams, like um, PPG. All those companies have different levels and different qualities of paint. And depending on how much you're paying, quite frankly, for your painter and ultimately for your home, that's going to dictate what kind of quality of paint they're going to be using most likely. So just something to notate that most of these interior finish outs, as the listeners are listening to this episode, hopefully they're learning that, of course, the higher the quality, most likely the more expensive it is. And so, yeah, just something to be aware of. Cabinets, this is a good segue too, that we're talking about cabinets next, which is typically what comes if the trim carpenter did not build your cabinets. Now's a good time to install your cabinets after the painter has come through, especially if they're going to be pre-finished cabinets. So that means they're painted in the factory when the cabinet maker makes the cabinets, then they paint them. It's really a pretty good way to go from what we've seen because the paint can be done in a paint booth. So it's controlled, it's climatized, there's no bugs or other defects that could get into the paint job. Typically it's baked on there too. They have heating elements that'll bake the paint on there. It's a really nice finish when you do go with prefab or pre-finished cabinets. But the cabinets are that next step. And there are many different levels and qualities of cabinets. Of course, there are the lower end kind of ready to assemble or ready to install kind of cabinets that you can get just kind of from a Home Depot or any other cabinet company, the online kind of. They'll ship them out and you just build them and then you install a standard size box. There's custom cabinets, which are custom measured to your space, and they can have fancy drawers and add-ons and trinkets and all kinds of things that you want to see in your cabinet. So anywhere in between there, there's a cabinet company for it, I'm sure. But yeah, hardware is important too on cabinets, not just the handles and the pulls and things like that, but also the hardware that holds the cabinets together. So soft closed doors and drawers are becoming important, and I would argue are a nice touch. But yeah, cabinets are a whole plethora of options in themselves, but just wanted to touch on that.
I will add this to that cabinets, Stephen, is that don't think for a second that job built cabinets are better than a what we would call a prefab cabinet. Custom home builders have cabinet companies that come out and custom measure every bathroom, every kitchen, every nook and cranny that they might be putting cabinets in, and then they build them in a controlled environment, like you said, and then they bake on the finish. I would argue that a manufactured cabinet built offsite is better than a job built cabinet, just because of the finish and stuff. So, don't get locked into your mind that it's not a job built cabinet and therefore it's not as good. I would argue that it's better to have an offsite cabinet built where it's custom made, custom designed, and they'll put in special drawers and spice racks and trash drawers and things like that, customized to whatever design you want. And it's a whole lot more flexible. And I think you can do a whole lot more with an off-site built cabinet than a job site built cabinet. So I think a lot of people just think that it's not custom. It's totally custom. Just because it's not built on the site doesn't mean it's not a custom cabinet.
I really like that distinction, because you're right. There is that connotation that it's not job built, or it's not built on site to be truly custom. It's actually, I would argue, more custom, like
Right.
you mentioned, to have the computer programs that we do nowadays for them to come out, laser measure every single inch of your space and exactly where the cabinets are going to go. They have all of the details into a computer program, and then they can use a CNC machine that syncs up with those cabinet programs or the software and cuts the cabinets exactly to size with big robotic machines, and can make each piece precisely. And it's not cut with a handsaw and a human anymore. I mean, these cabinets are very, very precise. So that's a really good distinction to note. I like that. Same goes with the countertops. So we can talk about that next. Now that you got your countertops in, or I'm sorry, your cabinets in, it's a great time to measure for your countertops. So you've got them all installed, and they can come out and measure exactly where your countertops need to lay and where they need to sit based on your custom cabinet. So once again, same thing, they're using those computer programs, and they'll come out with laser measurements typically. And our guy comes out with an iPad and all kinds of fancy equipment. He'll measure everything, draw up an entire plan, and then send us the electronic sketches of all the countertops with the selections and how they lay out on each slab, so we can see what part of the veining of certain quartz is going to go where. He gets very detailed with it. So that is an option. Also, granite and marble and everything else in between. And then, like you mentioned, I mean, for production builders, probably don't go through this much length. They probably just have standard countertop sizes for each plan that they build, and they'll cut them, and then they come out and they make them fit. They'll trim them as needed and install, but still some selection process there. But the countertops you want to get installed relatively early, or at least measured, because sometimes they can take quite a bit of time to go back and fabricate, cut the sinks in, and do all that. And that's going to hold you up for later in this phase, as we're talking about, where you're going to be looking to install your plumbing trim. So if you don't have your countertops, you don't have your sinks, you can't move forward with your plumbing trim. So we like to get our cabinets in there as soon as possible, get our countertops installed as soon as possible after that, and then the plumbing can go after that. So anything to add to countertops, Dad?
No, you said it perfectly. You just want to get them measured early. But like you also said, it takes sometimes a couple of weeks to get them actually installed. So there are things that we can be doing while we're waiting for countertops to be installed. So that's kind of a segue into what's next. What can we be doing?
Yep.
What can we be doing while we're waiting for countertops to be installed?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where the flooring and the tile come in. This is a great time to be doing that. You've got your countertop or your cabinets in, countertops have been measured. So if they do install any tile in those cabinet areas, which is very common for bathrooms, things like that, you're not having your countertop measure person walking on top of wet tile, that kind of thing. So get the cabinet or countertops measured right after cabinets get installed, and then you can start working on your flooring and your tile. And that can be lengthy process sometimes, just depending on what material they're installing and how big the crew is and how ready the house is, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, now's the time. So tile will be in pretty much all the wet areas of your home. So that's going to be the bathrooms and showers, definitely. And then some people want to do tile in the entire house. So all the flooring will be tile, sometimes fireplace surrounds, even vent hood surrounds, other places that they may want to have tile. So this is a good time to get that in there. And then flooring, other options for flooring, as most people are aware, I'm sure there's plenty of flooring options. So we've got products now that are laminate wood look products. There's also LVP, which is luxury vinyl plank type products. The tile, as we already discussed, engineered hardwood, true hardwood floors, stained concrete, polished concrete. What am I missing, Dad? Of course, carpet, but we can talk
Yeah,
about that
carpet is,
later
is
because that
with
would
you. And
be
you
a
wouldn't
little.
put, I mean, I think the flooring that you want to get in now is the flooring that is going to go around the kitchen and then especially tile. You want to get any tile in. You can almost wait on the hardwood floors because you don't want people walking on those until the end. Or carpet, you want to wait until the end to put the carpet in so people aren't walking on that or painters aren't painting it. But certainly the tile, if you're going to tile the floor, that would be a good time to do that. And the bathrooms, you definitely want to get those in. So I think you hit on that. One thing on the probably going into the weeds a little bit, but don't be afraid of engineered wood products. Engineered wood products, it's a wood product, but it's also very structurally stable. When you just put in a wood plank all by itself can tend to warp. So don't get in your mind that, I have to have a solid piece of wood as a flooring. When an engineered wood product is really a superior product because it's structurally stable and doesn't bend and bow and warp and shrink like a normal solid piece of wood would. So just a sidebar for wood floors.
And yeah, with all the new technology and these new building products that are coming on the market, I think a lot of those prior misconceptions should be wiped. Just like you mentioned, wood flooring, that's all changed. There's some really, really nice and great engineered wood products over a true wood nail down floor kind of thing. Same to be said for laminate. Some people have kind of a negative connotation with laminate flooring, and that's not true anymore either. There's some really, really nice, good looking, very durable laminate products. And same thing with any of the vinyl products as well. As long as they're coming from a quality manufacturer and they meet the needs that you're looking for, I would say all these flooring products or these tile things that we're talking through have their place in the market. So yeah, just making sure that listeners are picking what's going to be best for not only their budget, but also for the use of how they're going to be using their home
Yeah,
and their flooring.
right. Exactly.
So absolutely. Yeah, let's jump into the next part, which is kind of a bundle, but we're talking about the mechanical trim outs at this point. So that's going to be the plumbing, the electrical, and the HVAC and low voltage as well. So this is where all that would occur. These typically go pretty fast. This is where it gets exciting though, because this is probably where you consider the jewelry of the home. This is the light fixtures are getting installed and your electrical outlets are getting trimmed out and your switches are getting installed. For low voltage, if you have any smart switches or pre-wires for cameras or anything else, computer tablets or whatever else, that's all getting installed at this point as well. Plumbing trims, this is your sink faucets, this is your shower fixtures, your toilets are also getting installed at this point. Your water heater is typically going to get connected at this point, so you can turn the water on, you can start getting some hot water pumped into your house. And yeah, it's an exciting time because you start seeing all those things come together. Maybe a primary tub, that kind of thing would get installed at this phase as well. You can start to see your bathrooms come together now that you've got your tile, you've got your plumbing and fixtures, your electrical fixtures. And then for HVAC trim, it's really going to be the HVAC startup. So they're going to come out, they're going to set your condensers outside, so the big units outside your home. And or some people, they're also doing some more things on the roof and whatever else, but they're coming out to start up your AC units. And they're going to put all the AC grills on inside your house or the diffusers and really get your home started up and temperature control. So heat, cool, depending on what season it's in. And yeah, that's an exciting time as well because now your house is starting to feel more livable. You can turn your lights on, you can have light even if it's dark. You can run your water and you can start feeling comfortable inside your home, whether it's cold outside and you need your heater on, or warm outside and you need your AC on. Anything to add there, Dan?
No, that's pretty thorough. It's pretty straight up. I mean, those are what I would say the four biggest mechanicals: the plumbing, electrical, HVAC, and then your low voltage all go in at that time. And yeah, make sure that the exterior brick or whatever is on the exterior too, because there are outside outlets and lights that need to be installed. So I wouldn't schedule an electrician before the exterior is completed also. So we talked about parallel tasks. As all this is going on the inside, you want to be working on your outside. So make sure that the outside is ready for your electrical trims too, and your hose bibs and whatnot. So that was the only thing I'd like to add to that.
And that's a great point, because that takes us into the final part of this episode, I would say, where we can talk about the exterior. We've been talking so much about what's going on inside the home, which is exciting, of course, but same thing on the outside. The outside is exciting as well. Last episode where we talked about insulation and drywall. Once you get the house drywalled and you've got your roof on, that's the time where they're doing your exterior finish outs. So your veneer, so to speak, like your masonry, whether that's brick, stone, stucco, maybe it's wood look siding, or all the other options that are on the exterior of your home, but that's all getting finished out in the last episode, the last phase. Now for this phase, we're looking at flat work and grading. So tell us a little bit more about that, Dad, as we kind of round this episode out.
Sure. So to get the house ready for sod, landscaping, you need to do a final grade. You need to get a tractor or some type of a box blade or something to grade around the outside the house. So they might be bringing in some topsoil. Then you have to spread your topsoil. Those who have a tight lot maybe had to have a load of topsoil dropped behind the house before the house was built, so that there is room to get. You can't get to the backyard in some houses, especially in Texas where there's a 5-foot side yard, to do the grading. So, but this is where you want to spread the dirt, get the house ready for its final landscaping, and also at the same time make sure that the driveways are cut, the sidewalks are cut, because you need to put in a driveway and a sidewalk and get all that prepared. Of course, you want to pour your driveway and sidewalk before you do your landscaping, but it also prepares it for a sprinkler system. If you're going to put in a sprinkler system, it's going to establish the drainage away from the house. So it's an important step, but all this can be done simultaneously as you're doing the trims on the inside.
Yep. Yeah, that definitely hits on them. We typically like to start once the masonry is done. So like we talked about in the last episode, and that's all complete, we go ahead and just get the lot cleaned up. So somebody will come out, clean up all the trash in the yard, put it in a dumpster, haul it off, do whatever they need to do. That way the lot's kind of a blank slate. And we can go ahead and start forming up for our flat work. So just like we did for the foundation, they'll bring out form boards, put those out, form up the way that the flat work's supposed to look. Now, when we say flat work, that's going to be the driveway. That's going to be any sidewalks or walkways, any uncovered patios or concrete on the exterior of the home, basically, is the time that this would happen. So AC pads, generator pads, trash can pads, all that stuff would be included in this flat work phase. And it's fun too, because you can start seeing where you're going to be driving your vehicles, maybe to the garage or parking, where your walkways are going, how everything's shaping up as far as slope and finish out and everything. And then once that is poured, so you get the concrete in there, it's had the time to cure, they'll come out, bust off those form boards. And that's where, like you talked about, they'll bring in any fill dirt that's needed at that point, whether it's topsoil or other type of fill material. And they'll use a skid steer or bobcat, whatever, and be able to maneuver that material around the yard to make it much better of a slope and get everything flowing water-wise as it needs to, away from the foundation, away from your flat work, build up any areas that you want to see a little bit higher, maybe cut down any areas that you want to see lower. If you're doing a retaining wall or anything like that, that would fall under this final grade section, where they're creating that wall and holding everything back and then filling it in with the proper fill material, all that kind of stuff. So quite a bit to look out for here, but basically the goal of this is to get the yard ready for irrigation, landscaping, and fencing, and any of those exterior finish outs that or the yard finish outs that'll come in the next episode at the final phase. So Anything else to add, Dad, as we kind of wrap up this episode? I know we've covered a lot.
Yeah, and just one thing for, if you're building a home, one thing to look out for is make sure that there is room. If there's an exposed foundation, especially if you're doing a slab on grade or something, you don't want the dirt to be right up against your siding or your brick. Make sure there's about 6 inches or more of exposed foundation to the bottom of your siding, so that you don't want the dirt touching your siding. You want to make sure that there's a gap there. So that's something that you, as a home buyer, or if you're building a home, just kind of watch out for that and make sure that there is a gap there, so that you don't get water or your siding sitting in wet dirt, or because they're going to put sod in or something like that. So you also want to be able to see if there's termites coming up the slab. So if you keep that gap, and in the recommended distance is between 6 to 8 inches of exposed foundation. So just something to look for.
That's definitely a good note as we're talking through grading, because you want to make sure that whatever this grade looks like is most likely what it's going to look like after they put your landscaping in. It may change slightly as they're trenching for your irrigation system, things like that. Once they put sod on, keep in mind that the sod will be a couple inches thick as well. So if they bring your grade dirt all the way up to 3 or 2 inches from the bottom of your exterior veneer or siding, once they put your sod in there, your grass or whatever flower beds are going to be up against the house, you're going to be covered. You're going to be up over your limit. So just keep an eye out for those kind of things as a listener and a homeowner, because you absolutely want to keep an eye on that. Make sure whatever the lot looks like when they're grading it is what you want it to look like. Is the water going to be going where you want it to? Do you see any areas of concern that need to be built up more or brought down more, that kind of thing? And then as far as the flat work, just checking slopes too, making sure that there's not too much of a slope on any area of that flat work, especially if you're going to have to be driving. You want to make sure that that's comfortable to drive on. So as much as you can, and that your car's not going to bottom out, all those kind of things. So just some things to look out for. But yeah, good notes, Dad.
Yep. Or the flat work is, you don't want it too flat that it's going to pond either. So make sure there's just fall, but not too much fall. So yeah, a lot of things to look at.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. A lot of nuances there, but hopefully, if nothing else, like all these episodes, we're trying to just kind of keep it high level, just so that the listeners know what to look out for. As always, if you've hired the right builder, these shouldn't be areas of concern. It should just be areas of maybe talking points or areas of excitement of what to look out for next. So that's really the purpose of these episodes, and kind of setting the stage for your custom home build and what to get excited for and what to look out for. So as always, to all of our listeners, thank you so much. We love doing this podcast, and it's for you guys that we do it, of course. It's not for us. And we just love helping out. We love sharing our knowledge. And for that, if you guys don't mind helping us in return by subscribing and then leaving us a rating or review on whatever platform you listen on. Hopefully it's 5 stars. We love the feedback, and it also helps us grow the podcast so we can get it out to more people. So once again, thank you so much for listening. And that'll conclude this episode 34, where we talked about the trim phase.